Last time we met, I mentioned I had that emergency appendectomy, and I am back at the gym and doing all the things, and I'm good.
Oh, are you allowed to lift heavy weights, like back to 50-pound?
Yeah, I'm not back up to my world record, weightlifting, but I'm getting there.
Awesome.
My deadlifts.
Deadlifts.
I'd like for you to record that next time you're in the gym. Send that along.
Yeah, I will.
Oh, we could make that, Jeremiah. I love that suggestion. We can make that part of his.
Well, it's great having you on today, Jeremiah. Thanks for coming.
Well, great.
This is a great.
This is a great episode.
I hate to interrupt your gym selfies, but
it's right.
Hey, Loren.
Hi, Kelsey.
How are you doing?
Doing great. Great.
Excellent.
How are you?
Are we ready?
Yeah.
I am doing well. My energy is finally back. I think I got struck by the colds of whatever was going around, and I felt sick for over a month.
No good. Oh, it's a long run. A month?
It's so long. It's like you think you're over it, and then it just comes back and
yeah, that's a long run. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, so I finally feel like my energy level is high and back to normal operations.
Good. Welcome back.
Thanks. It's good to be back. So it's also good to have another episode of Campus Confidential.
Yes, it is.
Why don't you tell our listeners who we have on today?
Oh my gosh, I am so excited to have with us today Dr. Jeremiah Shinn. He is the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Affairs at Boise State University. He's been there, I think, just maybe almost exactly 2 years. This is his second stint there. He was previously an Assistant Vice President for 10 years. In between, he was at LSU in Baton Rouge as the VP for Student Affairs and has previously served Indiana University, a place near and dear to my heart, as Associate Director for Student Activities. And then here near my home in Ann Arbor, Assistant Dean of Students at Eastern Michigan. He is quite an accomplished guy. I think that will come through in the episode itself. He's on the board of trustees for Leadership. He's been, and maybe is, I think, actually still on the board for NASPA James Scott Academy. He holds a bachelor's in natural science from Arkansas Tech, a master's in education from University of Michigan, go Blue, and a doctorate in educational leadership from Eastern Michigan. He also, by the way, holds a certificate in educational management from Harvard. And I see his name often. He's a frequent presenter and speaker on leadership issues, student development, organizational effectiveness, and a faculty member actually too at for a number of I think he's taught over 20 or 25 courses on leadership across all graduate levels. So just a great guest. Glad to have him with us today.
Yeah, as our listeners, as you will hear in the podcast, I think he's one of few that have a very linear career in higher ed. He has served in almost every position you could possibly hold in student affairs. But as you noted in the intro, you do move universities. He didn't have that linear, it was linear positions, but it did require some moving in his time.
Yeah, I mean, we've established, of course, in this podcast that for some people, one place is perfect. That's the career they want and the life they want. For others, moving to grow in roles. That's been my path, is what they need to do. And he's been one of those people. Now, in his case, he returned, as I did. Was at Michigan, left, came back. He was at Boise State and came back. So the other lesson maybe is don't burn your bridges on the way out of jobs, right?
Definitely don't burn your bridges. Even if you don't go back, everyone's connected. Somehow it's like, oh, wait, we were together over here. And now we're over there. I just think this one, his intentionality, the way his mind works and thinks about organizational structure and leadership and the care for the team, the care for the student experience, the care for the community in which he is a part of and serving comes out in every piece of this conversation.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, though we didn't talk specifically about this, I feel like I often hear from Jeremiah and heard today the really thoughtful, strategic observation of the way the organism called the university works. And he's very smart about how he navigates that and communicates what staff and students might need to hear. He talked about that too often we make things complicated in higher education, and we need to make things simple. And we didn't get this on the episode because we were just chatting after the recording ended, but he talked about we find ourselves on the defensive a lot, and that's not the right approach. And he talked about getting back to basics, and reinforcing educational mission, empowering students, and demonstrating our value. And I just thought, yeah, that's the basic stuff we ought to be doing more of instead of chasing windmills.
Yeah, the chase might be over.
Yeah, I think the chase is over. Well, there's a different kind of chasing going on now.
Yeah. Yeah, but demonstrating value, getting really solid. So let's take a listen in. Here we are for another recording of Campus Confidential. Jeremiah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much, Kelsey.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us. So we're second episode of season 4, and we're kind of talking a little bit, Jeremiah, we're framing this a little bit of chapters. We think as leaders, there's in just humans in general, we have different chapters in our lives, and they impact us in a variety of different ways. And so I think the question we'd like to start with for you today is, what chapter do you think you are in your life right now, and what's happening for you?
It's really interesting. Just last week, last week was Education Week here in the Idaho legislature, and we were out for some drinks and snacks afterwards. And my boss, the president, just asked me, what's exciting in your life right now? And I sort of paused, and I couldn't think of anything exciting. And I realized that's actually good, because what I said to her is I'm in a place of overwhelming contentment. When I was growing up, when I was a kid, I couldn't have imagined that life could be this good. I couldn't have imagined that work could be this good, or that I would have found something that I enjoy doing more. And so I said, I don't mean to cop out and not answer your question, but I'm feeling overwhelmingly content. And that's, I feel like that's a good thing. So I feel like that's the chapter that I'm in at the moment. I haven't always been in that chapter. I may not always be in that chapter, but right now that's what it feels like for me. And it's actually pretty nice.
That's an amazing space to be in. I think if you listen to any leadership or development, or call them self-help, I don't know what the modern term for self-help books are. Is there a different term that feels old school? But it's really around finding contentment, because happiness and sadness, all of those things kind of ebb and flow. But how do you stay content? So that's an amazing place to be. You mentioned as a child, maybe you wouldn't have thought about being that. So talk to us a little bit about kind of your life journey to getting to this space that you're in.
Yeah, sure. I was born, raised, went to high school and college in the same town, Russellville, Arkansas. And it was a great place to grow up. I grew up around both sets of grandparents, which was really nice. I was able to travel with them. They would take me around the country. We would just get on the road. My grandfather, we would literally get to the end of the driveway, and he'd say, "Do we go left or right?" And I would say, "Let's go left." That meant we were heading west. And so we would end up at the Grand Canyon, or the next year we're going to go east. We'd end up at Niagara Falls. And so I was always curious about the world. I was always trying to learn. I remember during these trips, when we would be driving through a city, I would actually negotiate with him, because he would want to go on the bypass and I would want to go right through the middle of the city, because I was just curious about what was out there in the world, because we didn't have cities in Russellville, Arkansas. So anyway, I sort of had an innate curiosity, and I carried that with me through high school. Not everyone that I went to high school with went to college. In fact, I think probably relatively few did. And so it was not a foregone conclusion that I would, but I was pretty good at school. And so when it came time to go, I went to school in my hometown because that's just what you did. Got a Pell Grant, cobbled together a few loans, and made it to campus. And though I had been really involved in high school, I'd been student council president, I'd been a 2-year starter on the football team, and did all the things. When I got to college, I just it was really overwhelming, and I was intimidated and almost didn't stay. And my best friend's mother, now I realize that she was the vice president for development at my university, but it was just, Sherry. I went to her office one day and said, "I just don't think this is for me. I think I'm going to stop out and, just get a job, make some money, and then maybe I'll come back later." And she's, "Nope, that's not happening." So somehow I ended up in the dean of students office and, got an on-campus job and got involved and started doing some things, got connected with intramurals, got connected with student government, got connected with a fraternity, and then the rest is history. I sort of found my place and found my way, and eventually, as a pre-med major who decided not to do that, found my way into this work, and I'm so thankful that I did.
How big is Russellville, Jeremiah?
It's probably 25, 30,000.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a big city in Arkansas terms.
Yeah, sure. And so this story of being with your grandfather, go left, go right, was that your grandfather?
It was.
What has that been any kind of metaphor for how you've navigated life, or what did you learn from that, maybe even spontaneity of choice that has been instructive for you, or has it been instructive for you in life and career?
Yeah, I think so. I think in some ways he was a roll with the punches kind of guy. I find it useful to do a little bit more planning than he did, but especially in this day and age, get reservations and such. But no, I feel like that was, I learned a lot from him. He was, after he retired, he was somebody that, he said, you need to contribute something. You need to do something. And so after he retired, he became really active. He ran for elected office. He was the president of the State Retirees Association. He was really active in his church, doing all the administrative work for a little small country church. And so he was a really good example for me, just as somebody that just took on responsibility, that raised their hand and said yes, that said, I'll do it, I'll take it on. And so that was kind of, looking back on it, it was sort of inspirational and formative. And so I'm really thankful for that.
So it makes me think, you mentioned almost leaving college and you stayed. It sounds like you got involved in a lot of things. So what were the pieces, or how did you, was it the involvement in all of the things that moved you away from being a pre-med major? Did you stick with pre-med till you got out of college? How did that shift happen, and when did that happen?
Yeah, I think I stuck with pre-med until I learned what a doctor did. I just decided that I wasn't really all that interested in that, and I stuck with and completed my course of study. But so I don't think it was all the being involved with all the things that gave me a different path. I think that I'm fairly heavily introverted, and I think through life, when I give in to my introversion, when I sort of withdraw, which I did when I first got to college, I just withdrew and went to class and came back to my residence hall. It just doesn't put me in a good space. And so I've always needed to get out there and do things just to sort of combat that. Now, I do have to be introverted sometimes. I mean, there are times when I just need to go sit in a room, but there's a limit to it. And so I think that was me sort of learning what I needed as a person, how to balance this need to process and need to be alone with the need to be out and active. I love being around people. It exhausts me. And it did then as well. And so When I tell people, that I'm introverted, they're always surprised. They said, "No, you're not introverted." I'm like, "Well, I'm not socially awkward, but I am introverted." Those are, sometimes different.
Very different. Yeah. Yes, they can be different.
But yeah, I think for me, it was just sort of learning how I wanted to navigate the world, and that has stuck with me today. I still am fairly involved in my professional community. I'm involved, active in my work, and I think that's what I need to be most successful. I'm at my best when I'm active in doing things, and also when I'm getting some time away and resting a little bit.
Yeah, so that makes me. I have so many questions, but I want to ask, how do you know when you need to take that step back and recharge yourself on your own, versus in the environment that you're working in the time and space that we're in? I feel like there's a constant need. I can imagine a need for you to be there, to show up. So how do you balance all that, and how do you recharge?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to balance it. When I think about the notion of balance, which we've talked about a lot, at least in this profession, I think folks often talk about balance. If you picture it like a seesaw, they talk about balance as if work and life, we'll just put those things, are at opposite ends, sort of far apart. And I believe that you're just as balanced if you move those things closer to the fulcrum. For me, it's not necessarily about how to balance, it's how to integrate it in a healthy way. For me, it's about, what does it mean to be healthy? What does it mean to integrate these things? And luckily, I have work that I'm happy to integrate, that I feel good about, and that is complementary with life. But I have, learned over time that there's a healthy way to do that, and a way that's not so healthy. And I'm so thankful. My wife is really, really, really good at helping me see when those things might be integrated in a way that's not helping me. And so I certainly appreciate her awareness and her ability to sort of see that. And also, she used to do this work too, earlier in her career, and so understands what it is and what it's about, and that it doesn't really look like some other work that folks do.
You mentioned a little bit ago that you're in a chapter, if you will, of overwhelming contentment. And I'm wondering if that's ever been true in other points in your career. When you look back, you can notice that, and whether that's something that just occurs or happens when all the planets align, or that's something you think somebody can create for themselves or recognize in themselves. Do you have any more observations about this stage you're in now?
Yeah, I can look back and I see one other time when I felt like I was overwhelmingly content. I can identify that and see that. In terms of how to create it, I think you have to be open to it. After my period of overwhelming contentment, I entered a period of, hey, maybe there's something else. Maybe I can do more. Maybe I can push myself a little further. And so I left that overwhelming contentment and went into a new challenge. And I'm so thankful that I did. But what that did was helped me understand how much of a gift contentment can be. Right? The grass is not always greener, and that doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that contentment is a gift. And having been there, having not been there, and now being there again, I really appreciate it in a way that I didn't the first time.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And so much of our culture and narrative around work, let's say, or really life, is charge hard, climb higher, move faster, look for more. And I'm guilty of it, to be honest. And I think that sometimes what happens is people, you see folks that have retired or reached a point in their career where they're not pushing so hard anymore, or I noticed this even in my own parents as they aged, is they just seemed calmer, and they were professional folks working in education, and if you can find that earlier, what a gift that is. What a moment that is to find that earlier in one's life if you can. So I think that's such great advice, is to sort of maybe look for it, notice it when it's occurring for you, enjoy it while it's there, and maybe there's not a need to push so hard, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that's hard. Had somebody told me that, I'm not sure I would have been in a place to listen. You just have to experience it. It's not really advice you can give. It's just perspective you can offer.
Yeah.
I completely agree. And it makes me think about, I think you've either talked on this, written about it, but this concept of do less better. I think we hear do more with less a lot, but I love this idea of do less better. So can you talk a little bit about where that comes from and means to you?
Sure. We're in an era in higher education, and particularly in student affairs work, where there is no more money, there are no more staff, there is no more space. And yet the needs and wants of students continue to emerge and evolve. The need to innovate, the need to change is ever present. And so the only way that we can free up the resources, the time, the space, the people, the money, to do these things that are emerging is to stop doing other things. We can't continue doing what we've been doing and do all the things that will be demanded of us in the future that we might not even know about yet. And so that, coupled with the fact that when I talk to students, I don't hear them asking for us to do more things. What I hear them asking is for us to do things well, for us to do things that are relevant, for us to do things that serve them, for us to do things to make their lives easier, right? So do less better is an acknowledgement that there is no more. And in fact, if we're willing to scale back on the number of things that we're doing and invest those resources into doing the things that we do really well, I think we're going to be further ahead in the end.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I was in a conversation yesterday with someone, and I think stopping doing things is so hard because we feel like the other person or the group of people are going to be impacted, and it's going to have such a ripple effect that's negative. And the person I was chatting with, they're like, we've taken on so many things that the only thing I say is, what are you going to stop doing, over and over? And she's like, in the last 6 months, we've stopped doing 32 things and nobody's noticed. She's like, some small, some big, but 32 things. So I think there's an opportunity to have that.
And what I appreciate about you saying that, Jeremiah, and sort of really encouraging folks, giving folks the permission to do that is, everything being done was authored by somebody, and we don't necessarily want to hurt people's feelings or edit their work. It feels hard, right? And until leaders do that, we're doing a lot of things poorly or wasting resources or serving everybody poor, So I appreciate that philosophy, and then that encouragement or permission for people in leadership roles, in your case, really in the profession, as you've written and spoken about this, to do that, because it's hard and it's other people's work that we're stopping. Somebody's work at some time we're stopping.
Sure. And I think that it's important, and I've tried, and maybe I've been more successful at times than others, but I've really tried to contextualize the stopping of things by saying, listen, we honor the work that we did in the past by using that as a bridge to be more relevant into the future.
Yeah.
Right. When we stop something, it doesn't mean that it didn't have a place. It doesn't mean that it wasn't relevant. It doesn't mean that it didn't matter.
Right.
What it means is it was a bridge. It was a response to a moment in time. And the world is changing so rapidly that the moments in time are changing, and we have to respond to those. And so whatever got us to this point is worthy of celebration and appreciation. And it's not necessarily what's going to get us to the next place. Holding on to it is not how we honor it. Being sure that we're even more relevant because of that bridge is how we honor it.
So it makes me think, you sit in a role with a title, some privilege, some authority, some access that makes maybe saying you can stop doing things easier. If you think back around your career, you've grown up in student affairs. You've had many levels of roles to get to this role that you're in now. How would you think back if there was a vice president telling you to stop doing things in a role as a coordinator or an assistant director or director? How are you keeping in mind where you're at now, where you were, and how that impacts people differently?
No, I think that's really important. And I've had one of the most linear careers of anyone that I know. I was a grad student. I was a coordinator. I was an assistant director. I was an associate director. I was a director. I was an assistant vice president, associate vice president for student affairs, and now a vice president for student affairs and enrollment management. So
you definitely, that is the most linear. I think you win that award.
Right. I mean, seriously, literally, I've done every job along the way. And one of the things that and it's getting harder, I'll admit, but one of the things that I've really been intent on doing is I never want to forget how hard it is to do the work at each of those levels, because I've been in situations where, folks further along seem to forget how hard things are to do and how complicated things are to do, and where the rubber meets the road, how challenging it can be. So I'm not always successful because it's been a long time since I was a coordinator. Right? It's been a long time since I was an associate director, but I really at least try to get into that space where I'm keeping in mind, okay, here's how what I'm saying might be experienced. And again, I don't always know anymore, but I do try to keep that in mind and contextualize it for them and try to give them permission in a way that it seems real. Because I think that sometimes, Loren, you were saying, about giving people permission, it doesn't always seem real. I mean, I think sometimes people are saying, hey, what's the catch or that? And so,
fine print.
Right. And that doesn't, I even acknowledge that when you're saying do less better, it doesn't mean that we can stop doing everything. And certainly there are things we can't stop doing. Right. So I also try to be really clear about here's some parameters, or here's some values, or here's some ways to think about how to do this in a really intentional way. So I try to do that, and I'm certain I'm successful sometimes, and I'm certain I've got some growth left to do, and at other times. But that's in the back of my mind.
So I want to explore a few more of these. I don't know, call them Jeremiah-isms or Shinn-isms or something here. I tell me if I get this right. So I had the great privilege, Kelsey, a couple of years ago of being on campus when it was fall kickoff, divisional meeting, Jeremiah led, invited me to come. It was really just great. Not only because it was sort of like home for me, having spent my career doing that kind of thing, and also because it was so well executed and so well done. And Jeremiah was so eloquent in sort of setting and framing the year. And one of the things I recall, I think you tell me if I recall this correctly, was some message around keeping it simple. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about what you meant by that and how others listening maybe could learn from that message I heard today?
Yeah, so there were three messages in that I shared during that time. It was do less better. Mm-hmm. The next one was make it easy. Mm-hmm. So, and then the third one was start with maybe.
Oh yes, I remember. That's right.
Right. But the make it easy, I sometimes in higher education we have a tendency to overcomplicate things, and we have a tendency to overthink things. When I log on to my online banking, I don't have to go to a webinar or read an instruction manual to make it work. It just works. When I get a new iPhone, it just works. They don't even have an instruction manual for an iPhone. You just turn it on, the little Apple glows, and you're off and running.
Thank goodness.
Right. Whereas sometimes in higher education, to make it work, to operate it, you have to go to all this effort. And I think about a student like I was that, was the first in my family to pursue a 4-year college degree. I didn't have the navigational capital to to make it work. It just needed to work for me. And so that's what underpins this notion of making it easy. I believe that every single student at Boise State University can succeed if we remove the barriers and make it easy. So I charged our division with I'd like for you to find 100 ways, big and small, to just make life a little easier for our students, because I believe it's not one big thing. It's 1,000 little things that when you stack them end to end,
so true,
it actually makes a difference in the lives of students. They're surrounded by things. They don't even know that it's easier. They just know that it's easy. So we charge them with 100 things. And so far we're at about 160. We can document 160 ways, large and small, that we've made life just a little bit easier for students. And we're going to continue doing that
on this podcast. That's awesome.
No, I think it's important.
Yeah.
I really do, because I just, sometimes we build things around what's easy or preferable for us, and it may or may not be easy
Half
for
the
them.
time I was confused about what to do. And I mean, working there with all of the capital that you referred to, it was confusing for me as an administrator. So I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I just remember sitting in the room as you talked about. Now, yes, I recall all three things, but that making it simple message just so resonated with me. Why is it so hard to be a student? So good for you.
I was talking to our person that does our divisional marketing and communication yesterday, and part of making it easy is making our web presence easier. I believe he said we've reduced the number of web pages that we have in our division by 40%.
Yeah.
And in doing so, our traffic is up. The average amount of time spent on our web pages is up. So we've made it easier for students to find the things that they need to find. And we've designed it around how they're looking for it, not necessarily just here's everything we can think of to put out there. Good luck. And so they're doing a really great job in that space as well, as one of literally more than 100 examples.
Yeah. That show everything we have and have them pick what they want just doesn't work. It's like,
no,
this
it doesn't.
too overwhelming. And that's clear by your example on the website. It makes me think you seem very calm, level individual. I'll make that assumption. What's a leadership lesson that you have to keep relearning? What's something that keeps coming your way? You're like, oh, I thought I learned my lesson with that, but I get to grow again.
I think something that I keep learning and relearning, it's not because I keep failing or succeeding. It's just something that's always present in my mind. But I am fairly calm. I'm fairly even-tempered. I'm fairly predictable. Something that I keep learning is, in this role, I have to manage the thickness of my skin. I have to be sure that my skin is not so thick that it's impermeable to feedback, to observations, to things that could help us be better, to the human elements of the work, to all of that. I have to be sure that can get in, but I have to be sure that it is thick enough so that I'm able to stand firm when it's time to stand firm. I think sometimes in this work, because, and listen, this is not a criticism. People always need more resources. People are always advocating for this title or this, or, this space, or there's always advocacy across, lots of different departments. But sometimes you have to stand firm and say, no, this is how we're doing this, right? This is how we've got to do this to be consistent, to be sustainable, to be whatever. And so I think it's managing the thickness of one's skin, because sometimes it's easy in this role just to say, fine, just whatever, just go. And I think when you do that, when you get to that place, you've sort of that's not a good place to be. And so it takes, for me, it takes discipline to stay in that space. I'm not saying being rigid, but I'm saying being committed to being sure that we follow through on the things that we know map to a good organization. And then at the same time, not being impermeable to feedback.
Do you find yourself, Jeremiah, needing to manage your public persona when things are feeling particularly tender? We're human and we're in a leadership role and our feelings get hurt. And sometimes the feedback even could be warranted, but it just stings. And I'm thinking in my own career where it's clear they're giving me feedback on something that is about my behavior or my decision or my affect. And I've got then to perform in a certain way because I have a role to play. That means I've got to disguise or manage that in some way. I'm not trying to lead you anywhere. I guess I'm just thinking that listeners in roles, certainly because we're people in roles, there's two parts of us, right? May find themselves having to do that. And I'm wondering if you found that and what you've done to sort of make sure you could do that well.
In this role, I think you have to wrap your mind around the reality that when you make a decision, people judge you on that decision based on everything they can imagine was an option for you when you were making that decision.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
When in reality, I've found that by the time a decision gets to me, lots of smart people have had a crack at it. So I'm not getting the 70-30 decisions. I'm getting the ones that that just are really difficult to make. And often when I'm making a decision, I'm not making a decision based on options. I'm making a decision based on constraints, right? So there's like 1.5 things that I could do in any given moment. And so I sometimes have to choose just the least the least bad one. So when you're judged on that decision, it's like, well, that was a bad decision. Well, yeah, but you should have seen the other one I could have made.
Yeah.
Right. So
I absolutely.
I think I have had to, that's just part of this job. Right. So for me to be successful, I can't spend any time in that space worrying about that phenomenon because that's just what the job is. There is no other job other than that. And so I've gotten to an okay place, and it doesn't mean that I don't care. It doesn't mean that I don't want the feedback. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to explain the things when I can, but it just means that I'm never going to get to a place where what I just said isn't true.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suspect it also helps you, as it does me when I'm at my best, and it's not always or maybe even often, to give grace for the decisions others have made that I just don't agree with. I mean, how could they? I'm not in their shoes.
That is such a good lesson, because when I was young in my career, back when I knew everything, I've forgotten a lot over my career, because when I was young, man, I was on it.
Brilliant.
I was brilliant. Mm-hmm. But I had a lot of judgment and a lot of criticism for folks that sit in seats that I've now sat in. And, and now I realize, oh man, they really did the best they could with that. And so that really changes how I assess people. I even, I'll even debate about watching an NFL football game, and people are like, oh, the ref. And I'm like, I haven't been in the ref's shoes. I'm sure they've got a good reason for, it gives me a lot of empathy for people in all walks of life, because especially those that get criticized a lot, whether it's referees or politicians or, what have you. Things are complicated. And so I have some empathy for that.
Especially when your options are this bad choice or this bad choice, and you have to make one.
Sure.
Make it. So how do you choose who you surround yourself with? Because it seems in your role, as I heard you answering that question, when it's 70-30 or the choice seems easy, people are making that, and it's not even touching your desk or your mind. So it strikes me then the people that surround you are even more important as you move up in leadership roles. So how do you choose who you surround yourself with? What does that look like?
Yeah, For me, I've really over my career I'll just go into the hiring space. When I'm hiring somebody, I think that it's a mistake sometimes to just hire a resume. I think that I really tried. I mean, there's always going to be a resume. Are you qualified or aren't you to do the work? But I also really try to hire a skill set and an attitude. And so first and foremost, I want to work with people who are nice. I think people that are just good to be around. If you're not good to be around, if you're not genuinely nice and collegial, it's hard for me to get to the next step. That doesn't mean you always have to agree. I'm not suggesting being a pushover, but you know what I'm saying. Like, let's just
kindness.
Yes.
Kindness.
Let's just basic kindness. The second thing is I want somebody who's curious, right? I believe that when you're curious about how things work, and when you're curious about your work, the work of your colleagues, the world around you, what's happening out there that might influence us, I think that curiosity probably makes us better at our jobs. And then third, I want people who are reliable. So do you get the job done? Do you do what you say you're going to do? And so being nice, being curious, being reliable, I want to surround myself with people that are those three things. And when you are those three things, and you've also got the requisite experience, I'll bet on that.
So you're putting together a master class for a higher ed program. What are 2 or 3 courses that just aren't taught that you think really now, given especially today's context, need to be part of that preparation?
I'll tell you some of the most valuable learning I've ever had. The person that chaired my dissertation, he's since retired, but his name was Jim Barrett, and he was not a student affairs guy, not a higher ed administrator. He was a faculty member and I believe a former Gestalt therapist. And so he approached things from a Gestalt perspective, but he taught org theory and org politics, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't plug in a framework that he taught where I don't where I'm not trying to figure out, okay, here's what's happening. What does it mean? Because individuals can be unpredictable, but people in groups are actually pretty predictable, right? And so micropolitics works in a certain way. The organizations develop in a certain way. The environment influences things in a certain way. And so I think any master class in higher education really has to be grounded in how does this organization work and how do we manage the inevitable conflicts that come up in an organization, and that's micropolitics. And so that has been such a gift to me, just to understand the organization through that framework.
Yeah, well, it's good. It's a good thing there are no conflicts or micropolitics going on today.
None at all. So I'm not using it as much as I used to, but I look forward to it in the future.
Final question. This one's kind of for me. I think I saw a bucket list video, like what's on your bucket list, and it was to be in the draft room on NFL draft day.
Oh yeah.
So which team are you drafting for?
Well, I probably the Vikings, because I'm a Lions fan and I don't want to mess them up. So
that's right. I like that contrarian kind of strategic answer.
Oh yeah.
Go Lions.
No, I really, that's my bucket list. I would love to be in the draft room during the NFL draft. I just want to see, and it's kind of like any other room that you've ever wanted to be in. Then when you get in it, you're like, okay, well, this is kind of a normal room. It'd probably be like that, but I'd still like to see it.
Were you in Detroit for the draft last summer?
I was not. No.
It was fantastic. You would have just loved it, being both a Lions fan and wanting to be in the draft room. It was quite an experience.
Yeah, I bet it would be. I'm just fascinated by. I'm actually reading a book right now on soccer analytics. And what's interesting is I learn a lot about my work by reading about how sports is constructed and how sports is managed, because their results are a lot more immediate, they're still dealing with people. They're still working with organizations. And so I find it really instructive to study sports sometimes. And right now I'm sort of reading about just what matters in soccer, how you build winning soccer teams. So it's actually really fun, and I'm finding some application.
Very cool. Well, Jeremiah, I mentioned in this episode that I was in the room when you spoke to your staff, and I just learned so much from you every time you do speak, and today is no exception. And I, again, really appreciate do less better and making it easy and start with maybe, and the lessons of managing the thickness of your skin is both, it's profound and really practical. I mean, it's the way one navigates successfully a career in higher education and leadership. And then finally something, as you were saying this, that I feel like we're in short supply of right now, and kindness, and curiosity, certainly, and reliability, but kindness, just showing a little more kindness is something we all could do. And so you've given that to us today. You're kind to be with us. And so thank you. We really appreciate it.
Well, you're certainly kind to have me. I appreciate the invitation. You've got a great podcast, and you're doing. I know it is not lost on me that this is a lot of effort on your part, and you have chosen to do this as a service to all of us, and so know that that's appreciated and noticed.
Extra credit?
Do we have an extra credit?
I have an extra credit.
All right.
Okay.
What's your extra credit?
We heard Jeremiah talk about bucket list. What's on your bucket list?
I know. I was afraid you were going to ask me that. We took a break between.
I don't have one myself. I just asking you.
Dang it. We took a break between recording, and I was like, what will extra credit be? And I was like, it could be bucket list. And then I was like, I got to think of an answer if I ask Loren that question.
It doesn't have to be your permanent bucket list. It's just one that occurs to you. How's that? Nice and easy. Make it simple.
Make it simple. Well, going to Greece is just on my bucket list right now, and it's becoming more and more, I don't know if urgent's the word, but on my mind of how to make it happen. We are, I think hate continuing to use COVID, but since COVID, we've moved twice. We've started 2 different new jobs. Brian started a new job. Our lives have just been a little unstable, and they're finally stable in a number of ways.
You're reaching the stage of contentment. Overwhelming contentment.
Overwhelming contentment.
Almost there.
Pretty close. So going to Greece, I think, would add to my contentment.
It's a good bucket list item.
What do you have?
I don't know. I asked you that and thought, oh my gosh, I don't have one. I don't know if this is bucket list, but it's one of these things that I have I want to try to write a book.
Okay. A
couple of books. I've just had these things rattling mine. I took a writing course that really didn't help. It was really more fiction. And I'm not a fiction writer. I have this idea about these 3 university leaders, all in one state, all of whom I know about, who during the 60s sort of served at the same time and all integrated their campuses during the 6 civil rights changes. I have a supposition that they probably talked, that they would have crossed paths. And I just wonder if there's an overlap here about how they managed civil rights change in the 60s in this one state on these 3 campuses. So that's one idea. The other one is it's kind of dumb.
Well, that one was kind of deep. So
yeah, that's deep.
Whatever's next.
I might start with the dumb one, but I want to write a book called Average Joe's Garage, because one of the things I've noticed, and I'm one of them, is, if it's really nice out and you eat TV in the garage and the guy's over and you watch the game, or I've noticed other people have sofas and billiard tables. And I kind of would just like to do a coffee table book about how people have, use their garage for the expression of themselves. For some people, it's cars. Other people, it's kids. Other people, it's football, just a whole picture book. And I was influenced by, I saw a book in the store called Ultimate Garages by a guy named Phil Burry. And they're beautiful. They're just really cool, but they're unattainable. There's another one called Motor City Garages. These are these are rich cats with, who has that kind of money? I'm an average Joe. Joe's garage.
I could add to it. We had those folding chairs that, back in the 80s that were like wigged together. We took them from Brian's grandma's house and we'd sit in our garage when it was raining, but we wanted to be outside. So we'd open the garage and we'd have the chairs.
So that's my other book.
I also think, can I add to this book? Because I think depending on where you live in the country, you use your garage isn't as utilized as we in the Midwest like to use our
That's probably
garages.
Right. There's regional, So
there's regional differences for the average.
Well, and I went to I wrote a whole book proposal on this, by the way. I went to a book pitch, and there was a book festival in Ann Arbor. I went to a book pitch, and there's editors there, and you pay $10 and you have 2 minutes to make a pitch. So I practiced a minute, 50-second pitch, and I gave this pitch on this book, which I've forgotten. I'm so wordy right now. And the editors loved it. And one of them said, I like the idea. It'll come out at Father's Day, the book will open up like a garage door. And somebody else said, we'll package it with an oilcloth, like you're changing your, so and I thought, I got a book here. And I wrote a book proposal and I sent it off to like 2 different publishing companies. And I got the big rejection and I gave up. And I've heard people say, "Oh, come on, you not a real author till you've been rejected 116 times." Look at these people who finally wrote the book. So that's my bucket list. I have a couple of books.
All right, I like it. We're gonna check back in on this book because I think you can self-publish now. So there's really no.
There might only be 2 copies because now you 2 feel obligated to buy one of the self-published.
I'll buy one for family members too. So maybe count on 10.
All those Midwestern or family of yours who have garages and use them.
100%. I'll send you some pictures. It could be a photo book too. All right. Until next time.
See ya.
Campus Confidential is presented by Compass Group. Produced by Corey Inscoe, with your hosts Kelsey, Harmon, Finn, and Loren Rullman.